The China in Africa podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Africa-China Reporting Project at Wits University in Johannesburg. The ACRP aims to improve the quality of reporting on Africa-China relations through reporting grants, workshops, and other opportunities for journalists. More information at africachinareporting.co.za and our dedicated training website at africachinatraining.com.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the China in Africa podcast, a proud member of the Sinica Network from SupChina. I'm Eric Olander, and as always, I'm joined by Cobus van Staden, the senior China-Africa researcher at the South African Institute of International Affairs in Johannesburg, South Africa. A very good morning to you, Cobus.
Good morning.
Cobus, as you and I know, in Washington today, the focus is on how to challenge China's rising influence in the global south, especially in places like Africa. Now, even as the Biden administration has come into power and says that it wants to adopt a new tone in how it confronts China, it very much still sees Beijing as a peer competitor, and as we've heard lately in the confirmation hearings, as a strategic rival. So there's really not going to be any dialing down of the tensions anytime soon from the Trump administration. It feels more like they're just going to evolve and change. So while the U.S. and China continue to face off against one another, there's another great power rivalry also underway, but this one is happening here in Asia between the world's two largest countries, India and China. Now, it has been, and I cannot overstate this, it has been an absolutely terrible, horrendous year in India-China relations. The two countries have engaged one another militarily along the disputed border high up in the Himalayas on what's called the line of actual control. This is something that is still going on today. The rhetoric between the two countries, both from official government spokespeople and online, is just downright terrible, awful bad. Tensions also flared when India banned 58 Chinese apps, including TikTok. India, of course, is also a member of the Quad. Now, that's a club of 4 countries that includes Japan, Australia, and the United States that is nominally there to confront China here in Asia. So there's a lot going on in this space. And then, of course, there's the Indian Ocean and Africa, where countries like the Seychelles are being courted by both countries. Now, the COVID situation has taken a bad situation and just made it even worse. And I noticed this tweet that just came out today as I was kind of reading in for the show. And it said, while China exported the disease, India is healing the world. That came from Pema Khandu, who is a member of the ruling BJP party. And it really goes to show some of the mindset that's in India. And there's certainly equally aggressive mindset that's in China on these issues. But it shows you that COVID is changing the dynamic and extending the rivalry now beyond the Asia-Pacific region into the Indian Ocean region, and then, of course, into Africa. And vaccines are very much now part of that face-off between the two countries. India is the world's largest producer of vaccines. It's declared itself ready to be, quote-unquote, the pharmacy of the world. And a lot of those vaccines are coming out of a place called the Serum Institute of India, which is the world's largest vaccine manufacturer. It now produces the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine under license, which it hopes to, before the end of 2021, to get production up to 1 billion doses a year. So, Cobus, we have a very complex situation that is extending from Asia over to Africa, and it really shows once again that Africa, I don't want to say that it's caught in between a great power rivalry, but it's very much part of another great power rivalry beyond what's going on with the US, Europe, and China.
This is such a fascinating situation because, the US-China tension plays out in Africa as a kind of a global north versus global south tension. But the India-China tension becomes this interesting situation of who's souther, who's the more south of all of these different participants. And of course, both of them have long relationships with Africa. Both of them have kind of these complicated, politico-cultural ties that go back all the deep into the Cold War, and so it's really, really interesting to see how everyone is kind of leveraging the different kind of versions of southness.
And let's not forget that both countries are the major members of the Brics coalition. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So when India and China are at odds with each other, it really throws into question whether or not Brics has a future. Let's get a perspective now on where we are in the India-China-Africa relationship. And for that, I'm thrilled to have on the show Abishek Mishra, who is a junior fellow in the Strategic Studies program at the Observer Research Foundation, which is a leading think tank in New Delhi, and joins us from New Delhi. A very good afternoon to you, Abhishek.
Good afternoon, Eric. It's my pleasure to be on your platform and share my views on Indian and Chinese engagement in Africa.
It's wonderful to have you. And just a little bit of background about the research that you do. You focus on India and Africa's maritime cooperation in the Indian Ocean region, and you're also looking at the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And for many years, you've been a follower of China-India-Africa relations. So you are very much the right person for us to be talking to today about this issue. Okay, let's start with we're going to have a very broad-based conversation where we're going to touch on a lot of different topics, but I just want to get a sense from you as to where does Africa fit today in the current India-China rivalry?
Being Asia's two largest economies and long-standing partners of African continent, both what we are seeing is both India and China. We have been increasing our outreach to the continent, primarily through scholarships, through medical assistance, through training, capacity building initiatives, etc. Now, what has happened, especially since the outbreak of the coronavirus, COVID-19, is that all Indian and Chinese efforts have been primarily directed to fill a part of the growing African need at a time when we have seen that not many Western powers or European powers have stepped in to help. Now, for the longest time, as we know, China has been Africa's largest trading partner. And even last year, it was very quick, very nimble to signal its intent to help Africa cope with the pandemic. It dispatched medical protective equipments, testing kits, ventilators, medical masks, etc. to several African countries. Now, for China, one of the most primary motive of such donations last year was to basically not just raise Beijing's profile as a leading provider of humanitarian assistance, or as the so-called quote unquote public goods in the global public health sector. There was also China's, we saw billionaire philanthropy wasn't also in full display when Jack Ma donated various anti-coronavirus supplies. The embassies went on a donation lists of cash as well, although even the suboptimal quality of China's medical supplies have been a major cause of concern, especially what we saw in Nigeria and all. They took a issue with China sending their medical teams to Nigeria. So in my personal opinion, as far as China, what they have been doing since last year, as far as their Beijing's donation and their vaccine diplomacy is concerned, mostly it aims to achieve basically three objectives. First was to shift the focus away from talking about the origins of the virus in Wuhan, which is understandably a very sensitive issue for China. But it also aimed to build goodwill overseas and also establish a kind of a total image makeover in front of the world media. Now, on the other hand, what India has been doing for India, for us, this pandemic, it is presented, although there were several challenges at first we had to deal with, but it also presented an equal opportunity as well for India to demonstrate, its willingness and capacity to shoulder more responsibility. Now, the fact that even with very limited resources, India can fight the virus at home as well as reach out to developing countries is indeed a testament to India's status as a responsible and reliable global stakeholder. Now, nowhere, what is interesting is that nowhere has India's developmental outreach been more evident than in Africa, with the continent occupying a very central place in Indian government's foreign and economic policy in the last 5 to 6 years, especially. Africa has been the focus of India's developmental assistance as well as also diplomatic and political outreach. We are planning to open 18 new embassies by 2022, which will take our total number of embassies in the continent to 48. And as we know, India, Eric, as you rightly pointed out, India is known as the pharmacy of the world, which is a terminology which is frequently used by Indian commentators and politicians, etc. We are supplying very low-cost generic medicines. This is very widely acknowledged. Pharmaceutical products, as you know, along with refined petroleum products. They account for basically almost 40% of India's total exports to the African markets. Now, in terms of what India is doing, like 60% of our global vaccines comes from India. Our Indian producers, we supply 1.5 billion doses annually to more than 150 countries. We are the largest suppliers of BCG and measles vaccines and also DPT vaccines globally. The World Health Organization also sources around 70% of its essential immunization vaccines from India. So overall, what we are seeing is that like this tussle has been going on, like through our respective, both India and China, through our respective health and donation diplomacy. We are simultaneously vying to carve basically a space and a position for ourselves as a to be seen as a acknowledged as a reliable partner of Africa in its time of need. Now, burnishing our credentials as humanitarian champions has actually been the name of the game in the last 2 years.
It's super interesting to hear this rundown of the way that Africa is viewed in India. Like, what are some of the strategic concerns within India around China's expansion in Africa, and particularly maybe on the Indian Ocean coast of Africa and the islands? Like how is that viewed from New Delhi?
Basically, like, I mean, as we know, the Indian Ocean, it connects Indian western coast and along with African eastern coast. India has a very big, which is not often spoken about. India has a massive like diaspora, people of Indian origin and non-resident Indians in, especially mainly in East Africa. So that region has always been important to us, even in terms of trading perspectives and all. It goes back like centuries back. So, but what has been happening recently is that, as far as the Indian Ocean is concerned, is that there has been significant changes which has been happening, which is altering basically the balance of power between like in the Indian Ocean region, as many extra regional and non-resident powers are beginning to establish a permanent presence in the Indian Ocean. What we have seen is that in the last 10 years, in the last decade, the most biggest change we have witnessed is a sharp escalation in Chinese naval activities especially in the northern Indian Ocean, throughout its hydrographic surveys in the exclusive economic zones of the littoral countries, or growing deployment of submarines and unarmed underwater drones, as well as also we saw back in 2017 the establishment of its first overseas military facility in Djibouti. Now, what is interesting to note here is that although China does state that the base in Djibouti is basically to help them facilitate, basically they term it as a logistics base, and which will eventually help them to deter piracy in the Gulf of Aden. But what is interesting for us as Indian viewers and other viewers is that, I mean, how come you can use the excuse of piracy? I mean, there is no need for vessels and all when you have to deal with piracy. There is no need for hydrographic surveys or destroyers, or I mean an entire maritime militia if you want to deter piracy. That can be done in other ways as well. So biggest concern for India, which we have on China's presence in the Indian Ocean, is that basically what China is doing is it's seeking to pursue its national self-interest through very persistent and very consistent actions, with the eventual aim of being the dominant state in not just Indian Ocean, basically the entire Indo-Pacific. Now, the shape which this possible Chinese hegemony might take might be uniquely Chinese in character. Basically, it will be a kind of a Chinese hegemony with socialist characteristics. Now, COVID 19 has definitely made this more of a reality, more of a realistically possible rather than less likely. It has become made it more likely. Mainly, like, why? Because why I'm saying that, because as we know, the world's center of gravity definitely has shifted over the years from the Atlantic Mediterranean to the Indo-Pacific now, and this shift has occurred way much more faster than what the West has had planned for or anything. China is certainly the central actor in all this drama, but ASEAN is also fighting for its centrality. India and also have hastened this process of recognizing Indo-Pacific. Also, we have also seen that what expectations we had from kind of 5 years or a decade ago is that like that the balance of power between China and US, it's definitely there was a thought that like it will likely remain decisively in favor of America, at least for the first half of this century. But this has, as we know, this has been proved wrong. And also China, definitely they are building networks of trade. They are building an entire parallel universe in all these technology, finance, and trade, which will selectively reduce not just its vulnerabilities to America's hegemony, but also to other players like France, Japan, India, etc. So its international behavior in the year of COVID, when COVID-19 has surfaced, it gives it legitimate cause for concern to the peripheral and proximate states of not just Indian Ocean. I mean, including the African island nations like Mauritius, Seychelles, Comoros, Madagascar, but also to all the proximate states of the Indo-Pacific.
It sounds like you're dismissing the purpose of the Djibouti base in terms of what the Chinese have said it is, which is to support the multinational anti-piracy operations that they've been involved in for the past 10 years, which, by the way, they're not alone in doing that. Warships from other countries are there as well. And you've also used the word hegemony to describe China's presence in that region. I guess I'm just curious because do you believe that China's hegemonic power in the Indian Ocean? I mean, one military base is really not that much, and the Chinese Navy outside of East Asia is not anywhere near as strong to be able to enforce its interest in many ways. So it seems like pretty strong rhetoric that you're using to describe the Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean or the northern Indian Ocean all the way into the Gulf of Aden. And I'm just curious if you could be a little bit more precise on that.
Yeah, no, I fully concur that China is not alone in, having a base in Djibouti. I mean, there are 6, 7 other powers. But I mean, India is also doing the same. I mean, it's getting access with the help of Japan and all to the base in Djibouti, or in the Reunion Island with the help of France. We are also like, not overtly, but we are also like doing the same thing. I'm not denying that. But the point I was trying to drive home is that like as we know, China, they speak of a so-called community of a like shared future of mankind, or what they call like win-win cooperation. So it basically, what China is doing is that it plays the balance of power politics, and it basically acts in ways which take the advantage away from others in adversity. It China is aiming to like establish its supremacy in areas of productive technology, as I mentioned, trade, networks, financing options, in ways that shuts out the competition. Now, Belt and Road Initiative is a good example. It is not just creating a sinocentric system of like not just specifications, but also a sinocentric system of standards, of regulations, and as well as of, I think, norms as well. So with all these norms, standards, regulation, eventually in the future it will favor China's technology and services to the detriment and to the exclusion of others. So I'm not talking about China's debt and all that has been nullified. There is no, I don't personally don't concur with the debt trap diplomacy or anything of that sort. But the pressure it's creating, I mean, why? Do they have excess state capital, or why are they investing in projects? I mean, of course, we know that Africa does has a very financing gap, infrastructure gap, it lags in it. Those are important requirements which aligns with like China's and Africa's agenda 2063. But like it's creating dependencies is the point which I'm trying to draw. Not just digital dependencies and all, like what we saw with Huawei, 5G and fiber optic networks. These are some ways in which like China is trying to, if I may say, rewire the region for its own long-term benefit.
One of the kind of interesting contrasts between India and China as they present themselves in Africa is that India frequently emphasizes the fact that it's a democracy. And obviously, there's this strong democratic cultures in many African cultures and many African countries, and and that is a kind of an appealing point of meeting. However, over the last while, we've also seen the rise of Hindu nationalism in India, and with it, some kind of significant kind of anti-Islamic movements, popular movements. How are these developments affecting this kind of narrative of India as a democracy in Africa?
Nationalistic sentiments are definitely on the uproar, but I don't think it's like it has a bearing on what India's Africa policy has shaped out to be, especially in this last 5 years. I mean, uh, as we know, India and Africa, we share a rich cultural connect. It We have been collaborating. I mean, it's for more than 70 years we have had ties, not just from the spirit of decolonization, all the anti-apartheid movement and etc. Like from then we have been like training and giving assistance and capacity. So the definitely, I mean, yes, I do agree that, I mean, the nationalistic sentiments are creating a problem domestically, but I personally don't think it has a bearing on, especially on what India's Africa policy has turned out to be. Back in 20, I mean, one of the biggest problems which African leaders have had with India is that, like, basically, even after 70 years of having, like such a rich connect, we never like had a, we never had a clear cut vision or strategy. India never had a clear cut strategy for Africa. So this was a big grievance from the African side. But now, back in what we saw back in July in 2018, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he gave a address at the Ugandan Parliament where he basically outlined a vision, 10 guiding principles for bilateral partnership with African countries. Not just bilateral, but with the regional economic communities as well as in the continental level through the African Union as well. So, what this is doing is that we India, we don't normally have any white paper documents or something which will detail bilateral engagement with nations. I mean, that is for various administrative reasons and all. But after this 10 guiding principles on India and Africa, now we can say that we have a coherent vision or strategy. And although yes, nationalistic sentiments are on the rise, that's a problem. But at the same time, we can't ignore the fact that under PM Modi's administration, especially in the last 5 years, we have been trying to fix the like so-called niche areas or so-called problems which has often been associated with India-Africa relations. Our project, we have been termed as elephants and all because of a slow delivery of projects, etc. That record has improved. Total lines of credit India has over the overall cumulative is around $12.5 billion. All the targets which we mentioned back in 2015 at the third India Africa Forum Summit in New Delhi, which was attended by almost African leaders from 42, 44 countries, which was a big deal. So all the grants, like 700 million in grants, many concessional, yeah, we have opened many concessional credits, many lines of credit, almost $12.5 billion. Scholarships, what we don't talk about, we only tend to speak of China scholarships to African students. We tend to forget that India alone has also provided over 50,000 scholarships to African students in the last 5 years. So from 2015 to 2020 only, we provided 50,000 scholarships, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, which is more than what China has provided. So these are just some of the things. I do agree with Dr. Van Staden that yes, nationalistic sentiments are on the rise. That's creating some issues back at home, but that is a domestic issue. I mean, I can't comment much more on that. So
When we think about kind of the geopolitics of the moment that we're in today, there's this fascinating process underway in Washington now where the American government is trying to reposition its Africa policy in such a way that the offer on the table is something that's distinct from what China's doing. So there's this mood in Washington that says, okay, we're not going to be able to compete with the Chinese on infrastructure. We're not going to be able to compete with them on Huawei. There's a number of different things that we can't compete with them on. So what we're going to do is start looking for those areas where we have a competitive advantage on governance, on human rights, on democracy issues, things like that. The Chinese have made an offer to Africans which says we will give you financing. At least they did. That financing issue now is in question. But they will bring development. They will also bring support and a powerful ally at the United Nations. They will bring security issues now in terms of being the number one contributor to UN security for peacekeeping forces among the P5 members. So when we think about what India's offer is when they position themselves, the 10-point plan that Modi presented in Uganda. What is that offer? Because I think it's a difficult sell in one sense, because China has been able to convey that in the past 40 years, we've taken our country from being one of the poorest countries in the world to the second largest, possibly the largest country in the world. We're now no longer a pure developing country. We're a peer competitor to the United States, and we are the development model. We are the governance model, in fact, as well. And as we've seen in Uganda, interestingly, democracy is not really a sexy topic in many parts of Africa these days. So what is the offer from India in order to compete against the Chinese and to say we are not necessarily a preferred partner, but a different partner?
I mean, necessarily, it's not India is not coming with just the offer of democracy as a like as a distinction to China or other powers. Now, see what India and Africa, as far as we are concerned, we have a very rich history of both cultural as well as political interactions as well as economic engagement. All of these our engagements have been, if I may say, rooted in the spirit of developing together as equals. Now, indeed, our ties may yet redefine the contours of the international order along more egalitarian lines. However, as we know, Africa is a continent of the move, and COVID-19 has provided a lot of challenges. Now, we do have a very intrinsic interest in helping Africa achieve progress. I am again pointing this fact that the spirit of developing together as equals, this is what defines India's and Africa's partnership. That can define what China says also as a win-win cooperation. But how we are different is not just for our democratic credentials, but we are a predominantly English spoken country. That is one advantage which we have, like in areas like in global common challenges like South-South cooperation, or especially addressing challenges like clean technology, or maritime security, or blue economy, climate resilient agriculture, and all of these are areas where women's inclusion, participation, all of these are areas where Indian and Africa's Agenda 2063 aligns. So it's not as if, like, it's not that India is offering something very different to Africa. It's just that we do, I mean, we have had a connect for all of these decades, all of these years. It's now in the last 4 5 years where we have been driving home. We have been trying to capitalize on all these projects. Our project delivery has improved. All our commitments have been met, but still that is of course not enough. I mean, in the popular term, it's not enough. We can do much more, but we have to remember that, like, we are not as economically, like, driven or gifted like China. Even with our, like, limited potentials and all, we have been reaching out to Africa, and in no small way, if I may stress, in no small way, our numbers are quite good in Africa. It's just that, like, this infusion of energy and something new and concrete is what was missing all of these years in when it came to India-Africa relations. But now, to a certain extent, it has been rectified, and we don't need to. I mean, I personally am of the opinion that I don't see India and China as competitors in Africa. Actually, on the other hand, like, there has been instances of us cooperating, bidding together to win projects, oil projects back in Sudan, back in 2005 or 2006, and also again once more in 2011, if I am not mistaken. So I mean, India's cooperation with Africa is completely standalone. It's not influenced by what any other powers, let alone what China is doing in Africa. We recognize our competitive advantages in the region, which is, like, we speak English, we have a rich heritage, we have a rich cultural history with African countries. We have a huge diaspora there. Diasporas have been like, we have been using them as strategic resources to leverage our participation, and we provide scholarships and all the technical capacity. So many Indians, professors, medical teachers, etc. We are providing African countries with the skilling and the basic training which they require. We are not going to, I mean, we are not going to just provide them with money and dump them with investments. We are going to help them with capacity building, is what I was stressing upon.
Abhishek Mishra is a junior fellow in the Strategic Studies program at the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi. He is a regular commentator on India, Africa, China affairs on Twitter. He writes a lot for ORF as well on their website. Abhishek, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and to explain what is a very complicated situation, but one I think that we all need to start paying a lot more attention to, in part because of the challenges that are going on today between India and China in Asia do seem to be finding their way into the Indian Ocean and, of course, into parts of Africa as well. If people want to follow what you're reading and writing these days, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
I'm there on Twitter. It's at Mishra, Mishraesque.
Excellent. Well, I will put a link to your Twitter feed in the show notes and really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Eric and Dr. Van Stuylen. It was lovely finally getting the opportunity to speak with you.
Cobus, Abhishek has left me more confused about this issue than when we started the conversation. And I say that as the ultimate compliment to Abhishek because, again, you come into these issues thinking that you have an understanding of what the dynamics are. And as we're seeing in the India-China relationship, it is so complex, much like in the U.S.-China relationship, and it is bleeding over into Africa. There's no way around it. And we've talked on a number of occasions about how African governments and stakeholders are going to have to up their game in terms of how they deal with China to build more China-specific policies. I think the same should be true about India. And now that India is a major player in a number of African countries when it comes to vaccines, and even if it's not directly a Sino-Indian issue or an Africa-Indian issue, the fact is that the vaccines are coming from India, from the Serum Institute, and that's all part of the mix here. So the geopolitics of this are getting much, much more complicated. It is imperative that people take the time to actually do the research on it because, as he talked about, India and China share a land border. And that changes the dynamic of the relationship than, say, with the United States, which doesn't share a land border, but yet nonetheless is very tense and getting worse. And I just don't see how smaller countries in Africa and weaker regions like Africa will be able to defend themselves when these big giant powers are tussling with each other.
Well, I think for many African countries, they see it also as an opportunity. As a way to play different ones off each other, as a way to kind of leverage different kinds of connections. And I think that there's a lot that all of these powers can learn from each other. I think one of the things that India could probably note that they could take from China is the fact that China arrives in Africa with so many kind of instruments already ready to roll out. Kind of the way that funding is set up in China, the way that the companies work with the government. There's a lot of problems to raise around that particular relationship, but from an African perspective, it's a very efficient one. So so it is it's interesting to see the contrast between them, but I think there's also a lot of kind of like back and forth learning that could be useful.
But I don't get the sense that India works that way. So China may work that way, but much like the United States, India has a much more decentralized system, which is not a turnkey all-of-government approach to doing these kinds of things. And that's been one of the difficulties I think that India's had in jumpstarting its engagement in Africa in such a way that it does effectively compete with China. And that's when I asked him about the offer. What is the Indian offer? And democracy is what usually comes up first, but that's what the United States says. Again, I'm not entirely convinced that that's something that Africans want to hear about from a country like India. Whereas I think there are much more practical considerations about, for example, setting up pharmaceutical manufacturing operations, doing back office work, all the things that has made India so incredibly successful and vibrant as an economy today. A lot of that can be brought over into many African countries. And especially we talk about this quite a bit. that India is in a very similar stage of development as many African countries as well, that gives it a very distinct advantage in terms of the discourse that happens. There's this massive chasm when the United States, Europe, and Japan talk to Africa because they're so far removed from the development stage of where Africa is today. But that is not the case with India, even more so compared to China, where you have places like Shanghai or Beijing, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, which are at par with advanced economies. China today is on its way to being an advanced economy. That is not the case with India. So I think that there are some really great examples on what India's been able to do economically that can be brought over. And that to me feels like it should be more of its offer than some of the more political issues like democracy and human rights and things like that.
Yeah, I think there's also like India is an incredible laboratory of different kinds of policies, domestic development policies, and diverse, kind of ways of making the most with lean resources. And I think Africa has a long history of learning from India in that respect, and there's a lot more kind of peer learning that can happen. I think it's also what's very interesting to Africa is that it is that India comes with a kind of a reformist global agenda, to the table, and I think that is also something that Africa wants to hear. I think many African leaders, frequently when China talks about reforming the global system or challenging, kind of traditional hegemonies, I think many African leaders assume that what they're actually saying is, oh, we want to keep it roughly as it is, we want to replace who's in charge. Whereas, with India, I think frequently when they talk about reform a global system, they bring really concrete ideas of what that might look like, and that is frequently very attractive to Africans.
Very quickly before we go, just want to get your take as a constituent, a resident of somebody who's in a BRICS country. What do you think is the future of the BRICS? Now, let's kind of bring everybody up to date. The BRICS was this idea that it was supposed to be this alternative to the kind of Western-led system in many ways. This was the rise of the rest, as it was kind of famously touted back then. So much promise. Brazil, Russia, India, China, lots of excitement, those great summits where they had everybody kind of holding hands together. We thought, wow, this is incredible. And it is just now kind of like a bust. Because if India and China are at each other's throats, and by the way, Brazil and China also aren't getting along very well, so it doesn't really feel like there's a lot of camaraderie in the BRICS. What's your reading as to the future of the BRICS?
It's difficult to say. I'm a little shy of talking about BRICS because some of my colleagues are real BRICS experts, and I focus more just on China. But I think BRICS has been surprisingly kind of has proven surprisingly kind of robust over a long time. I think people have been predicting the BRICS falling apart forever, and they're kind of still chugging along. Obviously the setting up of the new development bank, was a major milestone.
That's true. The new development bank is a huge accomplishment. The new development bank out of Shanghai, which has been extending large loans into BRICS countries, $1 billion into South Africa. So you're right. That if nothing else, the new development bank, which was formerly known as the BRICS Bank, is a rather significant accomplishment.
I think the BRICS' challenge is always the kind of balancing everyone else's power with China's power, and the South Africa's accession to the BRICS bloc was really due to Chinese pressure, and it cemented the China-South Africa relationship significantly. I think at its best, BRICS provides a space for all of these countries to kind of put aside their rivalries and to work on some kind of unified agenda, but I think it's becoming increasingly difficult to say what that agenda is. And in the process, I think as the different BRICS countries move through different phases of government, so for example, we've seen kind of Brazil going from a left-wing kind of very democratic system to quite a right-wing system, during its time in BRICS. As they all kind of move from phase to phase, it also BRICS keeps having to kind of redefine itself. So I don't particularly expect BRICS to disappear, but I also don't necessarily expect it to like be this kind of world-shaping power that some predicted it to be.
Well, let's leave our conversation there. This India issue is going to be one that we come back to, in part because India is increasingly becoming a major player, not just because of Brics, but also because of vaccines, and then the issue over influence in the Indian Ocean. We didn't have time to get to the Seychelles, which was one of the questions that I wanted to bring him about, how the fact that China and India are both vying for influence there. So lots to talk about in the future. We do cover India quite a bit in our daily email newsletter, and I would love to remind everybody who listens to the show that as a listener of the podcast, we have a special gift for you, a 20% discount off of your lifetime subscription. That is, year after year, when it renews, you'll still get that low discounted rate. Just go to ChinaAfricaProject.com/subscribe. Use the promo code podcast, and you'll get a 20% discount on your subscription. That will give you the China Africa Daily Brief, also full access to our website and the China Africa Experts Network. So we would love to have you as part of our growing reader network around the world. That'll do it for this edition. For Cobus van Staden, I'm Eric Olander. We'll be back again next week with another episode of the China in Africa podcast. Until then, thank you so much for listening.
The discussion continues online. Head over to facebook.com/China Africa Project to share your thoughts on today's show. Or follow the guys on Twitter. Eric's at Eolanda, and you can find Cobus at Stadenesque. For more information about the China Africa Project and to sign up for our free weekly email news brief, go to ChinaAfricaProject.com.